Welcome to the podcast where three longtime friends talk about video games from the average gamer's perspective. My name is Andrew Kimball.
I'm Dylan Wren.
And I'm Aubrey Summer.
And
we are your friendly neighborhood gamers.
Welcome back to the neighborhood, and thanks for stopping by. Today, we're going to try out a new format that will hopefully allow us to do more episodes that are focused on a single game. For the pilot/test of this format, we're going to be talking about the latest game from Don't Nod, the studio behind the Life is Strange series and Vampyr with a Y. We're talking about Banishers, Ghost of New Eden. So before we dive into this episode fully, if you like the podcast, if you enjoy what we're doing here, we would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a 5-star rating and review on your podcast app of choice. Follow us on social media. And if you want to be part of future episodes, join our Discord. That's also just a great place to hang out with us and be part of the effing community. We're also on YouTube and experimenting a little bit with new formats on how we want to do the video version of our podcast. So you might be seeing our faces right now. If you like the YouTube version of this podcast, tell us that by actually literally liking it. Just hit the button and leave a comment. Tell us your thoughts on Banishers or some things we forgot, or, just your opinion on the game overall. So the idea behind this episode, I teased it a little bit in the intro, is that we, the three of us, play a variety of games, a variety of genres of games. And that's kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that it means we represent like a broad variety of gamers, which is what we want to do with our show. We like to kind of shine a light and discuss a variety of games and experiences. But the flip side of that is that it's much more challenging for the three of us to get on an episode and all discuss the same game, because the odds of all three of us playing the same game, especially to completion, is pretty low. Dylan and I, probably have the most overlap, but even so, like, there are lots of games that Dylan enjoys that I don't really touch. I mean, Monster Hunter's coming up around the corner, and that's one that I probably realistically will not play, but he's going to sink like hundreds of hours into. So because of that, we came up with an idea for this format where when one of us plays a game, in this case, me playing Banishers, we're going to structure the episode in a way where the other two will kind of facilitate a conversation by posing questions, trying to learn, coming on the episode to try to learn more about the game. And then the person who has played it will kind of act as that knowledge base and get to explain, their likes, their dislikes, what worked, what didn't, things like that. So these episodes will probably vary depending on the game as far as the focus of them a little bit. Banishers being a story-heavy game, I'm going to throw it out right now. We're going to go full spoilers into this episode. That might not always be the case when we do these, but for this one, since we're testing a new format, since this is a story-heavy game, and we want to be able to kind of talk about it and pick it apart completely, this is your spoiler warning. If you care about spoilers, or if you want to play the game before you listen to it, go do that. Come back to this one. It'll be here for you whenever you're ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
So what is Banishers? Thanks for asking. I'm glad that you asked. I went to...
It's weird because you're the host.
Yeah, I know. Maybe in the future I'll divvy up some of this informational stuff so people can hear everybody's voice. But
like, is this where I jump in? Like,
I pulled the information from Focus's website. Focus is the publisher behind this game, Don't Nod being the developer. And so I have some information about the game that I'll read before we kind of like start discussing the game in proper, just to give people a little bit of a background if they are curious. First of all, Banishers Ghost of New Eden is a title crafted by the renowned studio Don't Nod, known for their acclaimed works Life is Strange and Vampire. Immerse in an unforgettable action RPG that takes you on an exhilarating journey between life, death, love, and sacrifices. You assume the roles of a couple of banishers, experienced spirit hunters, entrusted with the daunting task of lifting a malevolent and ominous curse. Become a beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness and find a way to reunite with the love of your life. In New Eden, 1695, communities of settlers are plagued by a haunting curse. As banishers step into their lives, investigate the source of the evil, unravel chilling mysteries, explore diverse landscapes, and interact with unforgettable characters whose fate lies in your hands. Play as both characters. Red was once a remorseful mercenary haunted by the ghosts of his past victims. He found redemption through Antea's saving grace, and their love blossoms amidst. However, when Antea tragically passes away, Red faces a heart-wrenching dilemma between his love and his vows as a banisher. Antea, a renowned and highly skilled banisher, after an ill-advised attack, Antea is killed, leaving her lover in solitude and profound despair. Unable to move to the next plane of existence, whatever that is, Antea returns as the thing she despises most, a ghost. Torn between her bond with her beloved and the nightmare of her new condition, she makes Red swear to help her find deliverance from this horror. Your choices carry substantial consequences that must be taken seriously. Tormented spirits and afflicted residents share common stories involving love, betrayal, suffering, and hidden depths that bind them together. Every decision matters. At the end of your journey, past choices may come back to haunt you and your beloved. How far will you go to save the love of your life? And then in combat, play as both characters, combining Red's weaponry with Antea's supernatural abilities into a unique combat system where you fight spectral apparitions with fluid attacks. A mix of combat styles are available thanks to Red's rifle, sword, and Firebane alongside with Antea's ethereal attacks. So that is the blurbs from Focus's website. There are definitely some things in there that I think are a bit exaggerated and that I don't necessarily agree with in their descriptive language, but that
Yeah,
is
it's
what we're
sales.
going to get into.
It sounds cool. It sounds like a lot of fun. And I have not really played many of Don't Nod's other games, but like I am aware of the Life is Strange series. I think I've played a little bit of Vampire. Had you played much of their other stuff before this?
I have played, I'm trying to think. I played Vampire for like a weekend. I don't know how far I got into it. I'm not sure. I kind of got to where like you get to this hospital and they just throw a bunch of characters at you with a bunch of dialogue and you're not really sure like what's important, what's not. And I didn't
Kind
realize
of
at the time
grinds
that
it
it
to a halt.
was a Don't Nod game. So if I, had known that going in, I might have been like, okay, I understand what this is. I thought it was a little bit more of like an action game going into it. And I liked it for the most part, but I just kind of like fell off and never went back. I've never played a Life is Strange game.
Yeah, I was curious, like, what about this drew you to it, or like if you knew it was a Don't Nod game when you started it, because I have played the first Life is Strange all the way through and have like watched YouTubers play other like games in the Life is Strange universe, and that does not seem to be your speed at all. And so I was a little surprised when, not that I recognize the name Don't Nod, but when you were like, yeah, the people make Life is Strange. And I'm like, pause. And you played this?
Yeah.
Like, this was appealing to you? You beat this game?
So they made the first Life is Strange. And then, what is the name of that studio? There's another studio that's taken over the series, and Don't Not obviously has moved on to Vampire and this game. Um, but really, I think,
They have made other Life is Strange entries, but not like they made True Colors, I want to say, and um, They're making Bloom and Rage or what, basically Life is Strange but not named Life is Strange. So they are still making Life is Strange style games, but this seems different, right?
It's
Yeah.
gotta be.
This so what drew me to this is its setting and its aesthetic very much kind of spoke to me. I like the kind of like colonial American, like musket rifle sword, like that kind of thing. I liked the ghost hunting, the kind of like almost witchery vibes to like you're investigating these supernatural occurrences. Um, the other thing that kind of drew me to it was people talking about how it played kind of like a God of War or some other similar action game. Like the things that I heard leading up to this game was that Don't Nod had really like stepped it up as far as combat
Mm-hmm.
when compared to their previous games.
Had to have.
Yeah, I don't know what Life is Strange did as far as combat, if there was any.
None in the first one. I don't know about subsequent games.
Vampire was rough. I remember that game having pretty rough combat. And so those were kind of the things that drew me to it. Honestly, I didn't know initially that it was Don't Nod that made this game when I saw the trailers and stuff. But I did see Focus was publishing it, and so like Focus has been on a tear as far as publishing really solid AA games that I've enjoyed. Like they're the
Mhm.
publisher that did the Plague Tale series, and they've done a few others that I've played. And so they seem to be making or publishing games in that like AA space that I really enjoy. And this one seemed kind of like one of those AA games that was punching above its weight a little bit in like its presentation. And so that was what drew me into it. I was still a little bit leery or cautious. You know, I didn't play this game at launch. I played it probably almost a year. I'm not sure exactly when it came out in 2024, but like I didn't finish it until late 2024, maybe even early 2025 when I finally wrapped it up. And playing through it, I like knowing it's Don't Nod, it's like, okay, I can definitely see that the strong parts of this game are the dialogue choices, the characters, the especially the relationship between the two main characters, you know, as being like kind of like the through line of this game. And even though this game was a step up in combat from their previous attempts, I think the combat is like the number one thing for me that held this game back. I think that there were things in the story that we'll get to that I was like, yeah, you know, that maybe could have been done better or whatever. But also, it's a game that has potentially other variations on the story, and I only saw one, so maybe there are better versions that I didn't see. But the combat,
Yeah, break down the combat because you compared it to God of War earlier. So like that's a big bold comparison. Like how is it like God of War? How like what is the combat?
Yeah.
so I mentioned God of War because that is what I had heard. I would not tell people when I'm recommending this game to them, play this because it's like God of War. That I think was a little bit exaggerated. It's like God of War in the sense that you have a little bit of like a dodge, you have a parry. It's third person action, but it's not like Souls kind of like dodge and parry, but it's also not like stylish action game like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta or something. It's more grounded than that. And so, since you have the two characters, when you're playing as Red, you have a sword, you have your rifle, and then you have a banishing stick, essentially, that you get to use, and you just wail on enemies. And then you can switch to Antea with Y, and she doesn't have a health bar, but she has like this basically like this meter of spiritualness that when that runs out, you're forced to switch back to Red. So like you can't be her constantly, but she's not overpowered. the thing that they try to do with these two characters is they give the enemies certain statuses that you can like be more effective as one character versus the other. So like Antea she can't parry. She really like, she just does like ghost punches. And then she, as you play through the game, she gets like a big like burst thing she can do, and she can like teleport and like dash to an enemy to punch them. And like as you progress through the game and level up, you get more abilities that you can put into skill trees that you can like reassign at any time. And so you have some for Red and some for Antea. And so like depending on if you like to shoot more with Red's gun, which I found myself doing more later on because I didn't really enjoy the melee combat that much, you can like kind of go into talents that buff his gun and like will like, there was one ability I always had on where if you shot enemies in a weak spot, it would add like 40% damage to your next shot, and then that kind of stacked. And so like if you hit the same enemy a couple times with your gun, you could take it down. But you could also spec into things that would like let Antea be active for longer, that would like buff her attacks, but maybe at the cost of like Red's health. And so like there was a lot of potential customization and stuff in the skills. And so like on paper, it sounds really cool and it seems like a pretty unique idea, and it is. It's just that the enemy variety was really limited, and it just didn't feel good to do. It was another 6 months or something in development away from like actually hitting that sweet spot and feeling good. Like the parry window was weird. The dodge didn't feel good. The impact didn't feel satisfying. Like it just, and then the explanation of kind of like what is Antea better at punching versus Red hitting with his sword, like those kind of things weren't really obvious in the heat of battle. It was more like you kind of had to seek them out. And so it just felt to me like a pretty solid idea that just ultimately didn't have the like fun factor behind it. Like they didn't quite get it tight enough where it felt satisfying. And so anytime, like to me playing through this game, anytime that the enemies would pop up and like stop me from investigating or looking for the thing I was trying to find, or like progressing the story quest that I was on, anytime enemies would pop up in my way, it was like, oh, here we go again kind of thing. It wasn't like, all right, cool, I get to test out this new sword I picked up, I'm really stoked about this, or like, and I like action combat. I like third person combat is kind of my bread and butter in video games. And so for this one to just not click with me, it was kind of a bummer. And so I ultimately ended up dropping the game to easy in like the back third, just so I could not be slowed down. Like I wanted to see the story finish. I wanted to, I wanted to get the like the narrative stuff because that was like ramping up. But every time I would like have to face an enemy with a health bar or have to face a crowd of enemies, it was just like, it was a slog, mostly because it wasn't fun, not because it was like overly challenging or anything like that.
Yeah, it had a lot of good ideas. It just couldn't really execute on them very effectively when it came to the combat. Is what it sounds like.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I had a couple of thoughts as you were kind of talking about the combat. How does the combat play out? Like, is it like a lock-on system, kind of like a Souls-like sort of thing, or are you just is it more of like an actiony, like no lock-on? You're just kind of swinging in the general direction of something and using the sticks to kind of direct your attack. Like, what is that? What does it feel like?
Well, it feels like you're standing in knee-deep mud. But
no.
But there is a lock on, but the lock on didn't work. It wasn't tight. Like it didn't feel good. Like I said, when I sort of switched so basically what happens, you enter an area and you go, oh, this looks like where enemies are going to appear. And then whoop, sure enough, enemies appear. And I think if you're just like exploring kind of around the map, you could run away potentially. But in like kind of the more linear sections, it was like, no, you're kind of you're locked in until you beat these enemies. And so what happens is the enemies would come up. They're specters, and as specters, they're relatively weak. You can just beat on them with red sword or shoot them with a gun a couple times. And the gun, the way it works is you have one shot, and if you it's more for like if you're not leveling into it, it's more for like interruptions more than anything else, kind of like Bloodborne. Um, and then you have to like hold the trigger down for it to reload, and it reloads kind of on like a meter, and then you can shoot again. Um, and so the specters will then try to find like dead bodies on the ground and that they can like inhabit, and then that makes them stronger and gives them like shield or like the status buffs or whatever. And so if you can interrupt them or kill them before they get the body, then that's good. You don't have to deal with that. Sometimes they're just like enemies with health bars. But yeah, it basically like as Red, it was kind of an attempt at almost like Souls like God of War like kind of combat where you're supposed to lock on. They swing at you, you can parry. The parry will open them up for like a counter attack. If they're blocking, you do a strong attack to hit them. And then you fill up like a banish meter. When that's full, you can use your stick to kind of get like an instant kill on an enemy, or if it's like a boss, take like a big chunk of health out. And then you can switch to Antea if you're in like a bind, or if you want to, like, she had a little bit more AoE capability and stuff like that. So she was good for that. And so that's how the combat kind of played out. And then there were certain combat challenges that were like strewn about the map where it would be like chain attacks without taking damage, you build up your damage, or like damages after parry do more, or attacks after parries do more damage. And so they would kind of like push you to experiment with the combat a little bit. And I did some of those early on, and that was kind of when I started to realize that like this combat system, they're asking more of this combat system than it's willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I was gonna like, would you say the combat system is like, was it hard because of the way that it was, or was it just tedious and frustrating? Like on that scale, where would you kind of put it? Like, was it difficult and just needlessly so because the game was kind of like fighting you, or was it like understandable and like you knew what you were doing, but it was just like, this isn't that fun, and so it's kind of like, I know I'm going to wait. It's just more so tedious.
Early on, it was more challenging because I didn't really understand it. But then once I like realized that I kind of liked the way the gun played, and I knew when I wanted to switch to Antea and stuff like that, then it just became tedious. And because it really does kind of like the whole game doesn't feel fast. Like it has kind of that like walking sim. Like you move faster than a standard walking sim, but like it's not a fast game. It's more about going through these environments, talking to people and whatever. And so the combat, it translates to the combat as well, where like I think part of it is you're too zoomed in on the characters. So it's really hard to see anything other than what's in front of you. And then everything just felt a little too sluggish. Like it just didn't feel tight and responsive, which kind of made combat a slog.
Like as you were talking about it, I was getting very big like Hellblade vibes for myself, where it was just kind of like I understood very quickly what that combat system was, and I was like, I'm not enjoying this combat system a whole lot. It's not very challenging, and now every time enemies pop up, it's just like, oh, I really just want to get more of the story. So
I think that's a good comparison. The only difference is that Banishers tries to have depth. Like they tried to put some significant depth and thought into because you have the two different characters with different styles, that you can switch back and forth. But ultimately, I really do feel like it just needed a little bit more time, a little bit more like play testing and like tweaking. Because I think that the idea is solid. I just don't think that it was executed in a way that actually was like fun to play. And maybe, zooming out the camera could have helped a lot. I think also just like the character movement was just a big part of that. Like it felt kind of like sluggish.
Which, I mean, Life
And
is Strange was like that, where it
Mhm.
was very much like you're pushing down on like the directional pad as hard as you can. Like, please meander faster. Like,
Yeah.
move, please.
Yeah, in this game
Mhm.
you have kind of like a a, a jog that you do normally, and then you can it does kind of that like Gears of War sprint where like when you decide to sprint, you're kind of just going straight. Don't plan on like
Yeah,
veering off
there's no
much.
turning.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned like boss battles and stuff. Does the combat feel better or different like when it is a boss battle, or is it more of kind of the same, just a bigger boss with a bigger health bar?
So there are enemies with health, like basically heavy enemies, kind of like fat enemies that just feel like more of the same. But there are kind of at the end of each chapter, like legit bosses. The first one kind of felt um like a Witcher monster, or like maybe the wolf thing in Hellblade's a pretty good comparison, where it's like it's bigger, it's charging at you, you're kind of
Mhm.
like whittling it down, looking for weak spots, stuff like that. Um, a lot of the bosses though were kind of puzzly, where there's one where it was like kind of shoot these weak spots and then it goes down and you can banish it to take a chunk of its health, then everything goes black around you and you lose access to Antea, and so you have to like find her in one of these like little prison cells around the battlefield, but there's like fake versions of her, and if you find one of them, enemies come out instead of her. And so a lot of them kind of had a gimmick to them to kind of make up for the fact that the combat system wasn't really pulling its weight to just have like a, you know, one-on-one monster fight or something. And I thought, again, conceptually on paper, some of those are pretty cool, but they were also like the one I was just talking about where you shoot the weak spots. It's like by the time I did that 2 or 3 times, I think you had to do it like 3 or 4 times to kill the boss. It was like, oh, here we go again. Like it wore out its welcome, and it just ultimately became more of a slog than like a cool creative way to approach a boss fight.
Yeah. So better combat than Vampire, but still leaves a lot to be desired, it sounds like. Um how like how long did it take you to beat this game?
Surprisingly long.
Yeah.
I played this game for, I want to say 30 hours. I can pull it up real quick because I actually played it on Steam. Yeah, I have 34.4 hours in Banishers. And the reason for that is the kind of exploration slash story structure of this game is you go through the like intro where Antea dies, and like you go through like her coming back as a ghost and all that. And then when they kind of cut you loose, you go into like this wooded camp area, and then you like deal with like the core problem of like like you meet this group of New Eden leadership when you first show up in New Eden. Then everything goes to crap. Antea dies. Red gets like thrown out a window, floats down a river, whatever. And that leadership group kind of goes back to their various districts or whatever. And so one is in like the woods, one is in more of like a plain, and then one is in like a snowy mountain. And so you go through the woods first to kind of introduce you to the structure of the game, which is you're going to deal with like their core problem. You're going to unravel whatever kind of messed up garbage they did to get into whatever like personal problem they're having, but also how it relates to the main villain who killed Antea at the beginning. And then once you move on to the next zone, that first zone opens up with a bunch of smaller like side missions, like smaller banishings or follow up quests with the main characters, depending on how you decided to deal with them at the end of that run. And so for the first 2 zones, I went back and did all those side things. Like I was enjoying that aspect of the game quite a bit. especially the like that first group. I think that first kind of like wooded area set the tone really well and like introduced you to a handful of interesting characters with, pretty cool struggles and stories and stuff. And so I wanted to go back partially to like get more powerful, partially just to kind of see what was gonna like what the follow up to what I did there initially was. And then I did the same thing in the snowy region, which I felt like that one had a pretty long main story. And then when I got to the like third zone, that was when I dropped the game to easy. That was when I like did kind of the main quest.
Golden
And
past
then
it, yeah.
yeah, and that's where I still have all the follow-up side quests still sitting there as I went and finished the game. So you may be seeing gameplay for that right now while you're watching this video, because that is where I'll go back to knock out a few of those things to capture gameplay for this episode if if I do. So that's kind of like the overall structure. And so like each one of those zones kind of I guess took about 10 hours because, well, I guess the first couple, because the intro in the first couple. And then there's kind of like a connecting through line of like there's witches in the woods, and they kind of have a role to play. And on one hand, a lot of this stuff with like the lore setup was really interesting with like the Banishers lore, and like there's witches in here, and like the supernatural is kind of just normal and accepted in this alternate version of the world. On the other hand, it kind of felt like, what if we just had witches in here? Like it wasn't like like a lot of the stuff didn't feel fully fleshed out and like justified. I read probably 50 to 60% of like the notes and stuff I was picking up, because this game throws a lot of notes at you. It's how it conveys a lot of information, especially in like your investigations and stuff. So maybe if I was reading 100% of everything, I wouldn't feel that way. But overall, I liked that story, like the progression and structure, and then like the settings that it took you to.
Yeah. So how does a typical like zone or whatever kind of break down in terms of like combat versus like investigation and dialogue cutscenes, like exploring the zone, that sort of thing? Like, I know you mentioned like, hey, the combat's not the best. How much of a like one of those chunks is combat, would you say, versus doing some
Like
of
the
the other stuff?
investigation
Yeah.
or talking.
So, like that first kind of wooded area, for example, you show up, uh, you meet kind of the leader there. You realize that there's like a section of that group. Basically, that group evacuated from New Eden when everything went to hell, and they've made a camp in the woods. They're trying to kind of start up like a new settlement. It's two sisters, and the one sister has kind of like abandoned them and is like off in the woods hunting and stuff. Um, and so like the main quest is what's going on with these two sisters. Alongside that is like, oh, the blacksmith is missing, and a couple other little things like that have interesting, like they're side quests, but they also have interesting twists and stuff to them. So what you do is you take on these quests. They call them like hauntings or something like that, because basically
Mhm.
all the people you're interacting with are being pestered by some ghost that won't leave. And the sisters, they're being like, their issue is affecting everybody and is also tied back to the main story because they were like part of the leadership in New Eden. So you go, you spend time in the village talking to people. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of optional dialogue, like, hey, what's going on in the town? Or hey, how's your sister? Or hey, whatever. But then there's like key things that you have to discuss for your mission. And so you talk those things out, and then you have waypoints on your compass and your map. So it's not like super obtuse, like they give you a description of a landmark and you have to find it for real. It's like, no, you can kind of follow. And the world is set up in kind of like uh, a wide linear style of, you know, kind of Metroidvania, kind of like the Jedi games or Tomb Raider even, or God of War, where like in this zone there were things that I couldn't get to because Antea, as she levels up, gets more like her abilities affect the environment as well. So like her big AoE explosion destroys weak walls. It's basically like finding the bombs in Zelda. And so you can't do that yet, but then when you come back here later, you can. And so you go out, you explore, and when you're exploring is when there are the optional like side things like I was talking about of combat challenges and things like that. Those are just sprinkled around the world, chests and little environmental puzzles you can solve. Really, those things are pretty simple. Um, and then you get to the objective, and you usually combat happens just kind of on the way. It's like, oh, there are some wandering specters. Sometimes combat happens related to the quest, but mostly it's on the way. You get to the objective, and then that's when you like talk to the ghost person and you get like their side of the story and you start to piece together what's actually happening. Like, oh, it turns out this guy and his friend were out hunting and they argued, and his friend like fell off the cliff, and then this guy was starving, so he started eating his friend, and so now the
Ew.
friend is like still like here haunting him, but isn't actually like mad at him. He just can't let go. And so then like once you kind of piece everything together, you confront them, and you have the option of blaming the human party that was involved and like killing them and taking their soul to give to Antea so that she can become human again. Or you can either banish or ascend the ghost. And so banishing is like, get out of here. You have no afterlife. We hate you. You were a terrible person. Ascending is like, move on to heaven, like go
Go
be
be
at
at
peace.
peace.
Exactly. And so
Hmm.
basically you do mini versions of that, and then ultimately you do like a big version for like whatever the leader is there, and that will affect the region slightly. Mostly the choices you are given affect the storyline and ending of the couple, because that's kind of like the main point of the game.
Hmm.
So a lot of it sounds more like it's focused on like investigation, like exploring the world, talking to people, sussing out the like what is going on here, and then just kind of like interspersed in like traveling back and forth, there's some combat. And then
Yes.
there's maybe some combat at the so a majority of the game is not combat. Is that fair? Or is that
Yes, but there's more than there should be. Like
okay?
it's still like, in order for them to make the getting from point A to point B interesting, they add a bunch of combat. And so it's like, it is what it is. And on paper, like the way you said, the investigation stuff, I feel like that's more interesting, or it sounds more interesting than it is, because it really is kind of just handed to you. Like you follow the waypoints, you find all the like points that it's taking you to, and then the characters put everything together. And then it's really the only big choice you have is what to do at the end. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, you were a terrible human. I don't feel bad about killing you. Or sometimes it's like, no, we're going to ascend you because you're a ghost that's haunting this person, but like you're not malicious. You just need to let go, that kind of thing. And so I think I talked about this when I brought it up on the neighborhood watch, but like I feel like that was kind of a part that I wish they had leaned into a little more, of like leaving things a bit more open ended and making you, the player, kind of piece it together and decide how, the investigation ended up. Because it really, like the characters, they put everything together on their own, and then maybe they have some like minor disagreement about which way it should go. But ultimately, it's like, yeah, this is pretty cut and dry. There were only like maybe two or three little hauntings I did where I was like, I don't really know. Like, I don't feel like I know the good answer to this.
It it sounds almost kind of like less like a video game it's just is maybe an insane comparison, but kind of less like a video game and more like a movie or a TV show with mini games in it. Like obviously you're controlling like where the characters go and you can take as long as you want and poke around and look at stuff, but like the narrative is the narrative. And then there's the combat mini game kind of in between to keep things interesting. And then like vote on your vote on your phone now to decide whether they should, let them ascend or take it to try and save her. Like,
Yeah, because ultimately, like the thing that is supposed to be giving you, the player, like angst or like a struggle to decide what to do is not the plight of these villagers,
mhm.
because some of them are like, I feel like most of them are well written, interesting, but like
Yeah.
as you play through the game, you realize, especially the like leadership, they were all kind of just terrible people and they brought this curse upon themselves, and like you suffered for it because you lost your wife, and so you're not really, the
Like it's
struggle
trying
doesn't
to
really.
absolve you of if you decide to save your wife.
Yeah, it's trying to make it as morally gray as possible, because you have the option with your banisher knowledge to take the souls from these living people you encounter and bring Antea back from the dead, like as a human again, and you can go on and live your life together. Or you don't do that, and then at the end of this journey, when you finally save New Eden from this, it's called a nightmare, it's like a super powerful ghost.
Mhm.
When you finally save the village from the nightmare, she's gonna go too. You're gonna like have to say goodbye to her forever. And so like that's supposed to be the morally, difficult choice that the player's making. That's what like all of the other stuff like comes back to. But like for me, I decided early on I'm doing the Ascension playthrough. And so other than a few assholes that I just really wanted to kill, I pretty much banished or ascended like in at the end of every quest.
That's so funny that that's kind of the same like twist ending that Life is Strange has.
Hmm.
Like, I
Yeah.
mean, spoilers for a 12-year-old game at this point, but literally it's like, "Oh, yeah, Max, your powers are like screwing with the natural order, so a Cat 5 hurricane is coming out of nowhere to wipe out this town. So you got to decide if you're just going to flee with your blue-haired friend, possibly girlfriend, or if you're going to reverse time and let her die and save the town." And it's like, but like again, there's plenty of assholes in the town and you really like her and you know, what are you going to do type thing. And it's like that's kind of the sort of the same choice that you're making, but in theory, you have to make that choice more times. You have to commit to that choice a little more rather than just choosing it in the final chapter.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, like, as someone who's played other Don't Nod, like you've played the original Life is Strange, did that one feel to you similar to how you were kind of describing this one, where it was like it felt like the narrative was the narrative, and there were like you were doing things, but you weren't necessarily impacting the story. You were just kind of finding out the story. Like how does the other one for you, or Life is
This
Strange, I guess?
directed at me.
Yeah,
Uh
you.
kind of, yeah, because ultimately in Life is Strange, like there are moments where you can steer things in a more positive direction. Like you if you're friendly enough to a girl who's like being bullied and has a lot going on, and then like in the like moment you can stop her from like jumping off the roof of the school, um and like you can make more connections and know more things, but ultimately the plot is still your creepy photography professor is kidnapping girls and taking them to this like basement under this abandoned barn. Like regardless of what you do, that's still what's going on and that's still what you're going to run up against. You just like side character plots can kind of be positive or negative by the end of it. which is funny given the whole like, butterfly icon of like every action has a whatever. It's very quite Mass Effect in the whole type thing. And then, yeah, you stop him at the end, and it's like, okay, so you can either live with all of your choices and move on while a hurricane wipes out your town, or you can reverse time and let her die in the initial incident and then live through all of it again, to gather evidence. And like the game ends when you reverse the time, so there's not even like, and now that you've reversed time, you go and stop him with the information that you have. Like there's not even
It's
that
just
in
like
an epilogue, I
implied.
don't think. Yeah. It's like we hope that's what you would do as Max. So I think so, yeah. Like it did feel very, it pulled back to that where like the narrative is the narrative and you can influence it somewhat, and it's much more gamified, it sounds like, in Banishers. Like there's more gameplay stuff to do other than just reversing time to whatever point you need to and changing a dialogue option to get the answer you want, like that there was in Life is Strange. So it's interesting to me how I think if I were to play it like totally blind and not know that like Don't Not had made it, I would have made that link.
Yeah, because I guess that's like what I'm hearing too is just like number one, it sounds like the investigation piece is a little disappointing or a little bit like lacking. Like you said, it was more interesting on paper than it was like actually playing it, because in essence, it's just here. This is the next evidence or next person you need to talk to. Go here. Which, so you're kind of like Aubrey was saying, just kind of going to the next, like walking to the next point where the narrative does its thing again. Which it, like, when I think of games where I've really enjoyed the investigation, like the Sinking City, where it is kind of just like, yeah, figure out where this stuff is, and if you don't collect some of the evidence, then you're not going to know what's going on. Where it sounds like it's really hard in this game to miss evidence, um if at all, like possible. Or like The Witcher 3, where it's like you're piecing together what's going on, and you can just be like, I'm a monster hunter, I don't really care what's going on, I'm going to go kill this werewolf. Or you can find out that like this guy actually got turned into a werewolf, and like this other person let his fiance in so that he killed her, and all of this kind of, like, and figure out that the real monster was actually the douchebag guy, you know and so it doesn't sound like that's what investigation is in Banishers. Is that fair?
Yeah, I feel like calling an investigation is like that's overselling it. In Banishers, you you're getting the story and you're getting to kind of have some agency over how it plays out. But and like the characters are investigating, but you as the player are not really investigating.
It's like reading a book or watching a show of like,
Mhm.
you're getting that information and maybe you can piece stuff together before the characters do if they feed it, nicely enough. But it is still very much like you're experiencing their story. You're not crafting a story through them type thing. Which, if the story that you're experiencing is compelling and interesting, then that's a totally fine experience. Would you say that
Oh
they
yeah.
they carried that off, or I mean,
Yes.
you finished it. You wanted to see how it ended.
Yeah, and it does a really good job early on of being like, "Hey, this thing killed my wife." And so like it does a really good job of kind of like initially throw like it sets you in kind of a weird interesting setting.
Yeah.
It gives you this cool idea for like a job of like being this, ghost hunter in this colonial America, and then it all goes to crap, and you see the villain at the beginning and you watch her like kill your wife, and then you get chucked out the window and you don't know where you like wake up, and you're And so you have a very clear motivation going through, like you still have to do your job, figure out what's like why it's there, what's going on, but you also have like personal skin in the game now. I do think that a lot of that kind of gets like if you do what I did and you go through and you do like a bunch of the side stuff, a lot of that can kind of get lost like it does in games like this where it's like, oh yeah, we were supposed to go kill that nightmare, weren't we? Because we've been helping everybody with their little haunting problems. But I do think that like the initial opening has a strong enough hook that I was like, yeah, I want to see where this goes. And I do think the three kind of main story arcs and like areas are all really compelling. And I thought a lot of the sides, like I do think the writing and the stories are mostly good. There's sometimes where the writing felt forced or, you know, pretty stereotypical or whatever. And it was like, oh, okay, I know what we're doing here. But for the most part, I felt like the characters were good. The writing was good. Like I wasn't too upset about the investigation being on rails because like I wanted to kind of just see what happened. But basically like the crux of the story is there was this girl in town that got accused of being a witch, and all of the people in leadership that you have interacted with had some sort of hand in her death. And so there was like this like military captain who was the one who like imprisoned her wrongfully. Then there was this kind of like clergyman shaman kind of guy who was the one who initially said, yeah, she's a witch. And then when he, he knew that no, this is false, like he didn't back down from his accusations. And then there's like the two sisters. One of the sisters was in love with the girl. And then the other one, I don't really remember if the other sister really had much to do with like the witch stuff or if she was just like kind of an asshole just in general. And like she was screwing up other people's lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically like you're piecing as you do each of these leaders, like overarching quests, you're finding out more about this character that was accused of being a witch and like what happened to her. And so shocking, she's the nightmare, or she has like manifested the nightmare. She's a ghost and she has like manifested this nightmare, which is like a personification of her like rage. And that
Mm-hmm.
is what's kind of like destroying the town. And so you piece all that together and it's relatively interesting. And there's a lot of like, I don't think the overarching plot of like the nightmare in New Eden was that spectacular. It was like, oh, the town's full of assholes. They killed an innocent woman and now they're all being haunted. Makes sense. But it was kind of like how those characters subplots like spun off and like the kind of things that because of what they did and like their remorse or their grief or their like whatever was also causing like sub problems and sub hauntings that you have to deal with to kind of get to the larger plot. Some of those things were like pretty interesting to unravel and work your way through and stuff. And some of the like you can kind of tell probably by the way I'm talking about, like a lot of the ghosts and hauntings are like representative of some sort of a feeling or
A trauma
or
or
like a trauma. And
like a
so like,
hurt or yeah.
yeah, some of the ways that they like represented that in this game with like either a boss design or like the issues that is plaguing this area and stuff like that was cool and interesting. But like I said, by the time I kind of like pieced it together on my own, was tired of the combat and like, dropped it easy. I was just like, okay, I'm ready to get through this, fight this thing.
Mm-hmm.
The ending, it was still touching. Like you feel bad for you feel bad for everything. It's one of those games where like at the end, you're still kind of just like melancholy. Like you feel bad for the girl who was the victim, but then also became the antagonist. You feel
Mm-hmm.
bad for yourself because in my playthrough, which is, probably the good ending, like I had to say goodbye to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And then you feel bad for probably like a third of the townspeople that like were just victims in
Didn't
all
ask for
this.
any of that. Yeah.
But then you don't really feel bad for the ones that were like kind of the cause of all this. And so like, it's there's probably like people who philosophize or pontificate more than I do. There's probably like a lot of deeper meanings and themes of like humanity and all that kind of stuff
Mhm.
going on here. But like ultimately, it is kind of just like a witch trial gone wrong that all these people are basically getting what they deserve. But because it's your job, you're the banisher, and they have like a mantra or like a code they live by, which is, I should have written it down, but it's basically like life for the living, death to the dead, or something like that, where it's like the dead have to move on. That is
Mhm.
our code. Whether or not we we would rather see the living move on or what, like the code
Yeah.
is the code, we need to follow that. And so like you as the player decide, am I going to adhere to that and follow that, or am I going to be selfish and say screw these people, they deserve this, I just want my wife back. So like
Yeah, like
that's
what's your
your
line
exactly.
like thing.
Yeah. Well,
So
I was going to say there's enough. It sounds like there's enough gray area with a lot of these characters that you could potentially justify like taking their souls or whatever, especially the like how much I don't know if you know, but like how much of that do you have to do to bring your like do you have to do it to everybody to bring your wife back, or is it like you could kind of get by just taking the souls of like the
the
kind of shitty
really
asshole
obnoxious people.
peoples? Yeah.
No, I think you have to do it to a majority. So I don't know if that's
Yeah.
like 80%, 90%. You have to do it to a majority. And also, like, you have to decide what you're doing at the end of all these hauntings. So if you're not killing them, your ascension and banishing, either of those choices work towards the ascension ending. So you basically kind of have to decide early on, like what I read at the beginning, like Red makes a promise to Antea, and you can decide what that promise is. Like, I promise I'm going to bring you back, or I promise that I'm going to help you move on. And then I think about like halfway through, you kind of like revisit that promise, and they're like, "Are we still sure we're doing the right thing?" And so you revisit that promise, and so the game is really gamey when it comes to at the end. You're standing and you're looking at ghost human, and it's like in front of the human, it's like blame, and then if you hover over blame, it's like this choice will go towards bringing in Taya back, and then you hover over the other two and it's like this choice will go towards the ascension ending. So like they're very clear about like,
What you're working towards.
yeah, if you decide as the player, I don't care what it takes, I want to bring her back, like the game is not trying to hide that from you. Like what you need to do is blame these people. And sometimes you're blaming this like racist asshole who killed his fellow hunter because she was black. Other times you're killing this like really simple kind of, slow guy who has just been like living in the woods too long and doesn't really have a firm grasp on reality. And the ghost standing next to him is like, please don't kill him. He didn't mean to do it. He did. And it's like, no, I'm going to kill him anyways because I'm self like, so
Yeah.
they're,
Yeah, I just
they,
wasn't sure how many of those you could get away not like
yeah,
obviously they want you to actually like that choice to have weight, so I assume you're going to have to like
It can't be only
kill
the
some of
assholes
the
that you
quote
kill.
unquote innocent people too.
right.
But I was wondering just like how far on that spectrum do you have to go? Is it like you got to kill everybody? Do you got to kill like
You got to kill
uh
most of them. Like
yeah.
you got to commit to it.
Yeah, I was reading about the plot on Wikipedia kind of in preparation for this and read through the whole plot. Um skimmed, heavily skimmed. But like at the end it does talk about the three different endings, and there's the ascension, the resurrection, and then there's one in the middle where if you don't do enough of either, you land in the middle and the nightmare like screws you up, wipes Red's memory and throws you in a time loop back to the beginning of the game.
Oh, that's interesting.
So if you try and play it kind of neutral to sort of like get just enough or whatever for either ending,
Yeah.
the game will punish you for not committing to something. Punish is a strong word, but there are consequences to trying to straddle the fence.
Yeah, that would have been punishment for me because, like,
Right?
theoretically, and I think I mentioned this last time we talked about this, but like, this is a game that like wants you to play it again to kind of see the other choices and like, you know, but I have no desire to do that. Like, I think it was good. Like,
Hmm.
I didn't, we didn't really talk about it ahead of time if we were going to do verdicts in this
Yeah.
format, but like I would call it a good game. I would recommend it, especially to like you, Aubrey. Like play it on easy. I
Mhm.
think you'd enjoy the characters, the setting. Like I think there's definitely good stuff to be had in this experience. But I don't have a desire to. I mean, I played it for 34 hours. I don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
Pretty much at all. Definitely not like immediately.
Hmm. It's like it's one and done. You're satisfied with your experience and don't necessarily want to jump back in. I'm curious because I think isn't Don't Nod like a French company? Am I crazy?
That I think that
They
sounds
are
right.
French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they're like a French studio. Baby just kicked the crap out of me. Um, startled me because the dialogue in Life is Strange had some moments,
Yeah.
but they were also trying to write American teenagers in the Pacific Northwest and like hipster indie teenagers in like 2012. So it's not quite like, like Dark Pictures anthology bad, but it's not great. And I was curious if this game also had some moments where like phraseology or if it being like in a time period setting helped kind of smooth over some of those like bumps.
I don't remember that really even being an issue in what I played of Vampire. I think they took their lumps for Life is Strange and they decided to, step it up in that department. This game, no, I think the writing is solid. I think some of the like motivations and some of the like there's a section towards the end where there's a ghost that is like affecting Red and Antea's mood. And so like for the whole game, they're basically just like rock solid lovey dovey. We're on the same team. But in this like one section of the game, they start like snipping and snapping at each other, and it just felt so forced.
Just
It was
yeah,
like
just
it was
off
like
and wrong.
really obvious and like forced, and it was short. But then
Mhm.
like Red makes a comment of like, well, we've been, at each other's throats for a while now. This has to be the doing of this, this. And it's like, no, you've been doing this for the last like 30 minutes aggressively and like jarringly and frustratingly as like the player.
Yeah.
And so there were some moments like that where like I could see what they were trying to do narratively and like I understood and it made sense from a story perspective. It just wasn't like
Executed
hand
well.
executed well exactly. And so
Yeah.
there were moments like that, but as far as like dialogue, no, I thought the dialogue was great and like
Which I
most
mean
of
they
the
were writing adults.
yes, I
Like,
think that helps. I think they're just better at it now too. Like
yeah.
they've done more games since the first Life is Strange, and yeah, just different period, different yeah, everything. I feel like everything in this game is probably like a step up from what they've done in the past and is like probably some
Sure.
of their best work, but as a primarily like narrative focused studio, some of the like gameplay elements could still use a little bit more work if they want to be compared to like a God of War or something. Like people throwing
Yeah.
these like some of these comparisons around, it's like, okay, if you actually want to measure up to that, like you're not there yet. You still have a little bit of work to do.
Yeah. You're still very much double A.
Yeah, because that was going to be one of my questions is, like would you play a sequel to this game or just another game in this universe? And like what would that need to change? What would that need to improve for you to be like, yes, this is what I want?
I would
Banishers, Renaissance
absolutely.
Italy.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be cool. I would absolutely play. I think the universe is cool. I think the concept is cool. So honestly, like if they did this again and it was exactly the same, I would play it. But I would know to drop it to easy. I would wait for a sale or Game Pass or something. Like if they wanted to like impress me, then I would want to see them lean more into the like Banisher lore, like focus less on the couple relationship and more on like the actual kind of
Yeah, like the
lore of
organization.
yeah,
Yeah.
like the magic and the stuff in this universe. And then just tighten up the combat, figure out what it is that it's missing, like that secret sauce that's not there, whether it's like zooming out the camera and just like tightening the parry and everything, like tightening everything up. Maybe it's clearer on-screen communications about like why should I be using one character versus the other, like, and maybe there's only one character if they revisit this, I don't know, but just like make the combat enjoyable. And like I'm somebody that like enjoys combat in games. That's one of the like the things that I look for in the games that I play. And so I think if they did that, I'd be down. But like I said, I'd be down to try out a sequel, no matter like if they just did, as long as it's not a step down from this, I'd probably check it out.
Nice.
Cool. So before we, I guess, get into the more wrap up, is there anything that we haven't asked about that you want to talk about game wise? Like, is there any topics, any things that we missed
Anything
before
you were
we?
excited to share that we haven't gotten to
Yeah.
yet?
No, I think I've covered pretty much everything. I guess maybe the last thing is just like it's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Like people, us included, we have these conversations and probably will dive deeper into this on an episode dedicated to it. But like we talk about graphics and the push for graphics and visuals and stuff being like shouldn't be the most important thing. And like, are we sacrificing fun and are we sacrificing like is the games industry killing itself over visuals? It is on the flip side of that cool to see games in this double A space like Plague Tale and like Banishers. Like this game looks really good. It looks
Mhm.
awesome. The environments are cool. The Red and Enteo look fantastic. Pretty much all the like side characters look good. The bosses are cool. The enemies are like so, but for the most part, it's like yeah, this was a really good looking game. I had a good time playing through it. I think we covered pretty much everything that I wanted to touch on. So I guess if wrapping this thing up, if you guys have any more questions that
Mm-hmm.
you're curious about, we can go through them before we land this plane.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was kind of thinking like now kind of makes sense as like a some like closing kind of questions, and so the one on my mind is like you've played through this game. What are some other like media touchstones, like games, other movies, TV shows, books that like give a similar vibe where it's like, hey, if you like this other thing, maybe check out this game because it might be for you.
That's a good. I think that the like morally gray kind of depressing monster hunter like aspect of it definitely connects to The Witcher. Like it has some ties to just that. The Witcher, he's a monster hunter. He's slaying the supernatural monsters. I think the Banishers are a lot more. What's the word I'm looking for? They have much more of a kind of like a higher calling slash like moral reason to be doing what they're doing, whereas witches are just like, give me money. Like this is literally just a job. But that's I really don't know. I don't play a lot or like experience a lot of media that is kind of ghost related. And so that was one of the reasons that I was like, this seemed to check a lot of boxes for me outside of the setting that I thought would appeal to me. But then the setting seemed really cool too. I think like the Order 1886 is another game that's kind of like in this. It was a little bit before this in history, but kind of like a period piece dealing with like werewolves and, monsters and stuff like that. Um, I don't know, Aubrey, do you have any thoughts as some like maybe as far as TV, like Supernatural,
I
except
don't know. I was thinking
it's
about it. Like my
campy?
initial thought was kind of like early season Supernatural, where they were a little more like they had a little more heartburn over like trying to exorcise a ghost instead of just like killing the person and the like a demon specifically. It became a running joke in the fandom later that they got these knives that could like destroy the demons, like kill them, not just send them back to hell. And so from like that point on, they never tried to get the demon out of any innocent person's body. They just like come up behind him and stab him. And like it's like, oh, okay, cool. That's just a civilian you just killed. So like early seasons when they had a little more heartburn about taking innocent lives. Um Again, sounds kind of like in terms of like story progression and like narrative progression, kind of like Life is Strange. Um I don't know, story wise. I mean, I guess if you enjoy stories about, witches and witch hunts gone wrong and the idea of, participating in that moral quandary of obviously she didn't choose to become like possessed by the nightmare and try and turn around and take out her rage on innocent people, but the concept of like a vengeful spirit and, you know, being wronged and enacting your revenge. I can't really not beyond like kind of early season Supernatural. Can I think of another media property that kind of tackles that a bit?
And I think
Which,
that's like,
yeah,
I was gonna say, I think that's one of the like interesting things about Banishers is that it is like story and setting wise, it's pretty unique. Like we haven't seen a lot of
yeah.
stuff in this space, and I think that's one of the things that sets it apart. And like the kind of dual protagonists, and like one of them being on the side of the thing that they hunt, and so like there's a lot of cool
There's a lot of
concepts and
themes and
yeah,
tropes, and
exactly.
yeah, and like
Themes is the word I
ideas.
was looking for.
Yeah. Does it the only other game I can think of set in sort of like colonial era is like Assassin's Creed 3. Does that scratch any of
It
this like a similar itch?
No, they're very different games.
Okay, yeah.
it made me think a little bit about Little Hope and the like
Yeah, I was definitely thinking about Little Hope as he was
the
talking about some of
the
this.
witch hunt sub like tertiary plot, or not, it's not even like a tertiary plot, but like the witch hunt layer that I guess Little Hope had is how we'll we'll phrase that.
Yeah, there's some witch
Um,
hunty stuff in what's that Marvel XCOM game? What am I thinking of?
Oh yeah, Midnight Suns.
Yeah, Midnight Suns, because they delve into like Agatha
Yeah,
and
like Agatha and Scarlet Witch
Scarlet Witch.
and Magic and all them are kind of like a
mhm.
pseudo coven.
Hmm.
Because it is like a lot of monster stories where like you have the monster hunter and then their loved one becomes the thing that they normally have been. So like they have their code, they have their this is how we handle it, but then they're faced with but now it's someone you really care about who is brought into these circumstances in an extremely unfair way, and you have to decide if like this is still the standard that you're going to hold yourself and them to, or do you make that exception for yourself? And then also
Yeah,
just the very Guillermo del Toro like sympathetic monster.
yeah. No,
That's the
that's
best I can dig up.
no, that's true. That's a good point. And I think like my approach was, we this is part of the job. We signed up for this. We knew the risks.
Mhm.
To be fair, like I mean, in this game, I don't know, like they came up across kind of like one of the legendary monsters of their universe and weren't really expecting it, but yeah, that's a good point. Uh,
Well, and
did
that's the trick too with something like, and it's not really like fridging in like the traditional sense of the term of that trope of fridging, because that is like the whole point of the story. But for anyone unaware, fridging is a concept in media that came about mostly from comic books about the idea of a female character being killed off to further a male character's angst. Infamously done in a run of all superheroes, the Atom from DC, where his wife is killed by one of his villains and shoved in his fridge. Um, but like if the whole plot is centered around that action, it's not like fridging really, but you run into that with obviously Red is going to have like the heartburn, the angst, the will I give up my created, like how far am I willing to go for this woman I love, because that's who he is, who's he's written to be. You may not have had enough time to fall in love with Altea and like go, no, like these people should be together. Like, you know, like you've been presented with this is what we do, this is our creed, this is who we are. And you didn't, maybe you weren't given enough time, or the writing wasn't tight enough, or you're just not the kind of personality to then have that moment of like, oh, but it's my wife. I love my wife. I want my wife around all the time, like type deal. And so it's it'd be interesting to see like if they have the statistics on like first playthroughs, how many people went like in the various directions.
Yeah, I'm sure they do have those stats. It's not like a Telltale game where they like show them
Show
to
it
you at
to
the
you.
end of the
Yeah.
chapter, but I'm sure Don't Nod has that information.
Everything's got like an online
Mhm.
connectivity now.
Yeah, well, and I did look up how many banishes it takes, and it does look like it takes 14, 13. I think it's 13 um, that you have to do. But I think if you're ascending people, that like pulls the counter back or whatever.
Mm.
So you have to like be careful of what you're doing.
Yeah, because I
But
think there's like 24 total or something like that.
yeah,
So
so I
a
think
majority.
you have to do a majority of it as like kill the person.
But also not be like ascending on the other side to like counteract that.
Mhm.
To just be like
And I'm
banishing ghosts.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the achievements to see. It looks like 13% of people who have played the game, 21% ascended. And Antia, what's her name?
Antea, yeah.
Antea. And 13% brought her back to life. Now, some of those people are people who have like, obviously played the
Done both
game
endings. Yeah.
both ways. But it seems like giving her the ascension ending is the more popular of the two choices.
It's definitely like the good and like the quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote good
Yeah.
ending.
It
So
feels like the right thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's the the moral choice
Mm.
the versus the like selfish choice.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, do you guys have anything else you want to ask before we wrap this thing up?
Nope. I have a game if y'all want to play it, but looks like we basically filled an episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we got through all my questions basically in some form or another.
Cool. Well, with that being said, let's do a little bit of housekeeping here. Dylan, what's going on YouTube?
Well, that depends on when this episode
I was
comes
gonna say,
out.
broadly speaking, what's
Yeah.
going on YouTube?
Broadly speaking,
What is
like
YouTube?
like Andrew mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, we are trying to like tweak a little bit of how we put these episodes out on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you have the special privilege of you can directly interact with us on YouTube easily versus like pretty much every other podcasting platform. It's like go leave a review, I guess, if you want to. So like you can easily just like this or leave a comment where that's not an option. So, we'd really appreciate if you did that. If you made it an hour and 20 minutes into this, that'd be cool, because then that gives us the ability to know that you are enjoying this, or what you want to see more of. And also it helps throw us into the algorithm and grow. So broadly speaking, that helps us. Other than that, we've got some videos that have come out. Andrew did a preview of Kazan, the First Berserker, that's coming out either I think next month, or March sometime.
Yeah, I think so.
I did a video talking about Hunt Showdown 1896, and the things I like about it, and that sort of thing. So if you're interested in that game, or you have Game Pass and want to check something new out, maybe give that a watch. We've also got 5 more games that may have flown under your radar. Andrew talks about another 5 games that you might be wanting to keep an eye out for, and look at, and maybe try out, because a lot of people missed them. And then depending on when this comes out, there also, I don't know if this is like a sneak preview or if it's out, but it is a video about 6 games that are scratching the Left 4 Dead itch. And so if you're pining after some of that Left 4 Dead multiplayer goodness, we've got a video about 6 games that might give you what you're looking for, at least in some way, shape, or form. So
nice. And Aubrey, any closing thoughts for the people out there?
I've decided to force y'all into my little vocabulary corner after, again, all of the heartburn over bailiwick. So the word of the podcast is malfeasance, which means,
I've heard that word before.
Yeah, wrongdoing or misconduct, especially by a public official. So it's being naughty from a position of authority.
A lot of people in Banishers
with that one. I am familiar with that one. I've only ever heard it used in terms of my professional ethics for being a therapist, so I don't know if it's a common word, but as you claim bailiwick is. But
I never claimed bailiwick was common. I just claimed it wasn't that rare.
It was just uncommon.
Yeah.
It's not so uncommon.
Uncommon, yeah. It's like a green item
green.
in WoW. It's not like a blue or purple item. Not WoW.
I would say it's at least blue.
I don't know about all that.
You
I don't
and
know.
and Gil Grissom from CSI are the only 2 people that I've ever heard use bailiwick. So,
well, my original context for malfeasance was maleficent.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That is sense. A much more common item.
Yeah.
That one, I would give you malfeasance is maybe a green item. So.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first. Malfeasance is a green item.
Still trash it, like you're not using that past level 12. So
yeah, you throw that thing away or
unless it's the Ring of the Watcher.
Yeah. Unless it's
that's a joke for 6 people.
Not even. I don't know if Caleb knows what it is.
So she was saying that specifically for Dylan, but
it's literally just for him.
With all that being said, if you enjoyed this format, if you like how we kind of structured this as far as being able to talk about games that only one of us has played all the way through, let us know either in the YouTube comments or in our Discord or wherever you want to get in touch with us. We are on social media as well. Let us know what you thought. If you'd like us to do more stuff like this in the future, we definitely can. There are lots of games that only one of us will play or has played. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next one, and stay friendly, gamers.